Hi, I'm Rizz Khan. $5 billion and counting. That's the estimated cost to banks, airlines and medical facilities caused by the CrowdStrike software glitch that crashed computers around the world. Harder to calculate is the cost of the chaos and misery caused to millions of people who missed urgent medical appointments, family reunions and financial deadlines. Cybercriminals were quick to exploit the disorder, posing as help centers for people affected by the outage, then stealing their data and emptying bank accounts. And yet, the global meltdown was not caused by cybercriminals that people had originally feared, but by one of the world's biggest cybersecurity companies, whose business is to actually protect the online network. But suppose it had been the work of hackers or state saboteurs, what ransom would they have demanded? Organizers of the Paris Olympics have spent a fortune trying to protect against an onslaught of cyber attacks designed to disrupt the games. Well, as the world now contemplates the consequences of connectivity, a number of essential questions have risen to the top of the agenda of those fighting the hackers and digital thieves. How vulnerable are we to cybercrime? Who are the people working to exploit lapses in online security? Will the CrowdStrike event provide a wake-up call to the online community? What can governments, businesses, and individuals do to protect against cyber attacks? And are scenes of digital destruction and global mayhem still confined to Hollywood movies, or are they becoming a reality? In this episode, we'll get inside the mind of a super hacker who has turned his talents against the cyber gangs. And a senior US intelligence officer tells us how Russian cyber spies are using AI to cause chaos worldwide, with the presidential election in their sights. First up is Lance James, a hacker turned cybersecurity expert. He uncovered the Zeus virus, which stole more than $100 million from users of infected computers. Through his digital detective work, he's become known as a cyber Sherlock Holmes. When I met him in New York, he shared insights on a dark and dangerous world that few of us know, but a world to which all of us are vulnerable. Give me a little background on you, because I know your life started out on the wrong side, I guess, in terms of hacking. Is that right?
Well, it was more on the, so it was the 90s and it was a little different than what wrong side is today. So I just want to give context to that. But I was a little mischievous. I was a prankster in high school, always pushing the limits is probably how I would say it. But it's not like I was, cyber theft or phishing or stealing credit cards. I got a little bit of, I liked hacking and curious and playing around with back then on the internet, it was before there was a lot of GUI and or UI and pretty stuff, and they had all these open Unix systems, which is an operating system before Windows was even a thing. And yeah, sometimes I would play around and find a server at NASA or this or that, and it was really kind of like a sport. It wasn't like that, and then I'd leave a note, hey, by the way, I found this. And in my mind, when you're a young kid, you justify that you're being a good guy. But in their mind, from their perspective, because I've worked on that side now, they're like, holy crap, I just got hacked. And, so it was one of those things where it was I just needed to not be in a small town and needed to actually get into the tech industry and get some good mentors.
What were the consequences of those kind of things? Anything really bad happen?
Yeah, I did get in a little bit of trouble. I dealt with a judge in a court and, such like that. I was very lucky though. I had the community. I had, I used to play organ for the church that I was at. I was an Anglican. So I was kind of well known in our small community. And so they actually kind of helped out, and it was kind of more of a slap on the wrist and scared me and woke me up. Even the minister came to me and even swore at me, talked my language as a teenager. And if I'm being honest, I feel when I look back at the way hackers are and what drives them, I always have this saying, we're insecure because we're insecure. And I look back at my life, and I've seen this even in patterns today because I track bad guys or, hackers, and we've even helped some of them get on the right path, is that it comes down to kind of some people are drugs and alcohol for adrenaline, or this feeling of dopamine. And for mine, it was an adrenaline thing. It was and I wanted to fit in. I wanted to look like a magician. I wanted to look like I was cool, right? And it got, it got carried away. I didn't, and it's easier to disassociate and not realize you're committing a crime or doing something dumb. And that's challenging sometimes when you're young.
So when did you leave the dark side and go to the force?
I'd always call it gray. It wasn't fully gray. But it was grayish.
The gray side.
You know, I did it with a smile. I wanted to always, the idea back then was, the reason why I'd leave notes is I was trying to get a job in my mind. I thought it would get me to the good side of it. And I was, you know, in high school, like, what did I know, right? And so, like, actually, ironically, when I was finishing up the court stuff, the judge said, hey, if you can do yourself a favor and get the heck out of this town, you belong in like someplace like California. And so I immediately moved to San Diego. And I actually focused on two things: my music work, just because, you know, you're young and why not try that out? Because I was a trained violinist, piano all my life. And then I got a tech job. Literally my first tech job. I literally met the guy outside of my hotel, and it just happened to be synchronicity. And he's like, I'll pick you up tomorrow, $15 an hour, and you know, it started from there. So yeah.
And how did it develop? Because you ended up doing you have ended up doing some really cool stuff. Let's get first on to dealing with the hacking. What kind of things happened there in terms of what you had to deal with?
Ironically, after all of that stuff, I actually really focused on like trying to stop bad guys working. So I started building relationships with like the FBI and the NCA and a few different law enforcement organizations early, right? And some of the big ones, I worked Russia for a long time. Between 2001 and 2011, I really kind of focused around Russian malware and theft and espionage cases, right? There was one that there's a very famous in our circles, and depending on the audience, but like some of the cybersecurity folks out there in the audience will know the term Zeus malware, and Zeus is like the famous one. I discovered that in 2006, did the first reverse engineering of it, and it was stealing bank info from like, you know, thousands and thousands of people, you know, and then it was like, we're actually more like hundreds of thousands. It was doing not just banks, governments in all different countries. But in 2002, 2003, I actually discovered this malware that people didn't know how deep the Russians were going. Originally then. Cybercrime was just starting to kind of get on the verge here, and I discovered this thing called Burbu. It was a different kind of malware, and I had also found and partnered with the internet provider and say, hey, I'll solve this case for you, but you got to send me those hard drives. I want to look at and it was a home base where these guys were interoperating and communicating. So it gave me an advantage very early to see these Russians talking to each other, and that was kind of like the real start of like, wow, this is exciting stuff. And no one knew that they had laid themselves into some serious government networks.
So of course there's a lot of talk.
That's in 2002.
Well, there's a lot of talk about state-sponsored hacking and so on. So when you say the Russians, are you talking about government or are you talking about individuals?
Yeah, so that gets a little funny, right? Today things have changed, but so how it worked, I had pictures of the people that were involved, because remember, I had access to the hard drives that were their home base. So they did a lot of bragging. There was money involved, but Russia's had a complicated history in the you know, after the fall, like you know, Gorbachev and everything like this, the Cold War was ending. But in a weird way, and this is, you know, just the politics of it, is that the West, you know, America promised to help them with democracy. And in the reality, we probably went in for about a year or two and then just bounced out. You know, we won by attrition, and that was really, I think, the thing. We didn't follow through. And so, at least in America, didn't follow through on that side. And so what happened is then Russia started kind of having, KGB became the mafia. Like it became like people were in breadlines, people that were scientists and computer people and all this stuff. Everything was hurting their country. What happens when poverty happens? Crime occurs, right? Like if you want to quote Nietzsche, right? So like essentially, these 17-year-olds that were good at this, these young kids, the mafia would then put pressure on them to pretty much break in and build malware and break into these systems. So, you know, the kids would get a lot of money, and so there was a money side of it. There would be these phishing sites or these dark web type, before they called it dark web sites. They were anti-Semitic, they had Nazi signs, and they'd say, in fraud we trust. So it was both business and national security stuff. For instance, think about it like as there is opportunity. So when I think of national security, I think that's mission-oriented, advanced this. Back then it was closer to like opportunistic. No one had the military set up just yet. It was still falling apart, and so it was a process. So it was the KGB's like corruption was pretty much using this because they needed money. And so they went after money, but it's still a government operation. It just isn't what we would call national security the same way today.
So play on in God we trust, in fraud we trust.
Fraud we trust.
Lance, what scale is the kind of cybercrime? I mean, we talking billions?
Yes. Unfortunately, so when I was doing all the early stuff, it was just starting out. So you could actually manage big cases and like actually do things. And then now it's you know, we this will get into even AI, but like we can, what has happened is there's like a pyramid of like distribution, meaning it's like kind of like any supply chain. You have the creators of a technology at the top, and then they sell that technology, then people then use, and then it becomes service. In the cybercrime world now, back in the old days, it'd be like one group makes the software, they also do this, maybe there's like this. Now it's pretty much a do-it-yourself kits. So I can go online and buy a piece of ransomware without having to be technical at all, just because I'm upset with a company that I used to work at or something, right? And maybe they left their password still the same and I could get in. And that's the problem now, is it went from like pretty much like one-offs, you know, here and there, very advanced, sophisticated groups, to those advanced people realizing if I just write this code and give it to many people, those many people will service this. I'm not really breaking the law in my mind, and that's an iffy area that we've had to deal with, is if you write malware code, is that breaking the law, right? And then you'd have just all these opportunistic actors that are now going out, and it's become a frenzy.
There's the same question as if I build a gun, am I responsible for someone shooting it?
Correct.
Yeah. So interesting thing is, I mean, the issue of when we talked over the years, you were often dealing with ransomware crimes. Give me some examples to those that you can talk to of the kind of things that happened.
Well, so a lot of times what I focus on is my background is strong in cryptography, right? And ransomware, the way it works. In 2013, the big ransomware that like kind of put itself on the mark, and then ransomware became the name. We've had ransomware since the 90s, technically. They were called logic bombs, but they weren't en masse. They were just concept ideas. It's kind of like Bitcoin was a concept idea in the 90s, but it's, you know, we needed computers to scale, right? And so now that cryptography can scale, right? You can generate keys on the fly, they're fast, they've got these, you know, we've got powerful chips, because it's all mathematical. So computation is expensive back in the earlier days. In 2013, there was a ransomware called CryptoLocker, right? And that was a Russian group. And it was, we talked about that distribution, it was actually, we go back to Zeus. There was a Zeus peer-to-peer version that was just designed, it was a different company. So think of these actors as different, running different like resellers or distribution companies, or I've got the ransomware, and then like the actors like trying to collect. It's an entire supply chain. So there was this Zeus peer-to-peer malware. It's kind of like the highway. They've already have all these infected machines to get, you know, and they'll sell and say, hey, we've got all these machines. You want to get your ransomware on these machines, just pay us for a fee and we'll like give you access to 100,000, or like, and it comes almost like tiers. Like, do you want 1 million? Do you want to, you know, and pay this? It's almost like Stripe, right? You know, and like just go and put in your credit card and go. It's not obviously just that. It's usually like a different kind of payment system, but essentially something like that. So what happened when CryptoLocker hit, it's shocking to everybody, because it was like finally the day that all the security people in the background were always kind of waiting for, because we knew it was possible because of the way cryptography works. But we had found a weakness. So I put together and worked with the FBI at the Washington field office and also New York. And we also then, I got calls from like the NCA. And what I did is I realized sometimes, you know, this is an international incident. And the challenge with law enforcement is that they have this thing called an MLAT, or a mutual legal attaché treaty. So it requires like, almost like extradition laws. It takes a while in paperwork. To get a hard drive fast would be very difficult. So there was this group that's a nonprofit, and also I created a mailing list so that like basically industry, law enforcement, wherever you're from, could talk to each other and share intelligence right off the bat, knowing, hey, we got to move fast, we can't wait for this. So if that occurred and it went through me, then I could hand that off to the UK, and if that occurred, then it was handed off this way, and it allowed them to just say, hey, I got this, and then those people could take action in their own country immediately. So you needed to basically build like an information sharing platform across internationally. So I built the CryptoLocker working group, and then we found a vulnerability in how it worked. And so what I like to do with ransomware is I like to find my job in the 2001 through even now, I like to find weaknesses in bad guy programs. It's all about offensive versus offensive. Like, you still got to go with the law. But essentially, I found a vulnerability that they had this, this information that we learned how to predict. Once you learned how to predict, we were able to feed that into all the systems across the country, and it would stop the ransomware from actually working in their network, so we could get ahead of it. So it was, and then we actually pretty much took down the Zeus peer-to-peer network, which was another team, and we did an FBI coordinated takedown, and it was one of the fastest takedowns I've ever seen for this kind of thing. But it was the first one, but it meant one thing: ransomware is not going away.
When we see movies like one of the Die Hard movies, someone takes control of a city's traffic light systems, they can bring down airplanes. Is this just Hollywood, or is this real?
Today, it's been a little bit scarier, right? The net is a good one that I try to look at, right? So I grew up and I had a crush on Sandra Bullock as a teenager. So, and the net was kind of funny because when I was a kid, I'm like, that's not even close to true. But now you look at the net, and that is exactly what goes on. Identity. It started off with her identity was stolen, all of these things. The Hollywood movies make it seem like it's easy to do these things, like the kid's just on his phone and suddenly changes the traffic lights, all that. But what the reality is that there are governments and foreign interference out there that are focused on. They have pretty much military outfits or a certain type of outfits that just focus on gaining entry, but not doing anything with it, and almost collecting a black book, right? So they have the playbook if we had to go to war. So, and we're obviously seeing that more and more, like electrical grids and things like this with the smart energy. What I do, part of what I do is we also do pen tests for smart energy companies and other type of people that before they release something, that's the ideal way of doing it, is to act like the bad guy.
Right.
Because if you put those in and then they're not secure, and we get Moore's law and we keep going faster, the catch-up point is that. So yes, in a weird way, it's not as fast or as simple as it looks in the movies, but the reality of what's going on is real.
As technology's advanced, it's very much plug and play. People don't have to be technical to use it. Mm-mm. Are we becoming complacent as a society to the point where we leave ourselves vulnerable? All this thought about your cameras can be hacked and they can watch whatever you're doing, your phones can be listened to and everything. Is that all a reality?
Yes. Actually, it's really a really dark place there. This is not my research, this is actually our chief research officer, her research. She works on violence as a service, DDoS attacks, distributed denial of service, where people hit the network so hard it takes it down, things like that. But she's discovered even sextortion rings, and what they'll do is hack into people's webcams, and then it's caused people to commit suicide. It's caused it actually causes deaths because they'll hack into their webcams and blackmail a teenager because of a pornographic picture, right, or an inappropriate image, and it'll ruin their life. And they'll put this out there or this or that, and it's literally with children. And it's just, there's some really dark places that people are doing it. And that's the worst part, is it's teenagers doing this to other people in very awful ways, just malaligned teenagers that are not well, right? And so that goes from all the way to that to, yes, our governments can do this as well. But ironically, the attacks like that seem to be more in the child space, which is really, really scary because they haven't grown up yet, and unfortunately, the activities there have been pretty dark. So,
is it easy for individuals to protect themselves?
No, I'm going to be honest. I want to say yes, right? I want to truly say yes, but that's the heartbreaking about our problem about my job, and all of our jobs, because it is a collective, right? There are these frustrating moments. Right? In some aspects, it's easy in my mind. I'm a tech guy, and I'll write up code and go, why didn't we do this? And it might be one problem, and it's it's easy. But it's not that easy. It actually takes a certain type of thinking. You have to look at it a certain way, and it requires all the experience and maybe more that I have and other people on a team, right? For people at home, it's harder. I will say that iPhones are doing a better job than I'd say Android, because Android is more almost the operating system is a little bit more free and heterogeneous, and so you have more variables that could change. Whereas a homogeneous network like Apple, where it's this is this way, this is the same way, it pretty much, you can coordinate that security profile, right? It is the best way to say it. But it is not easy. Even it's tough. I'm a security guy, and I always joke. I said, "What's the easiest thing to do to a thief? Steal from them, right?" And sometimes I joke because I'm I'm the guy that's probably has my door unlocked once in a while here and that, right? Because we're staring so much at everybody else's problem, right? There are things you can do, However, like and stuff, and it really comes down to kind of just being mindful and aware. But it's a bit of a rabbit hole. I wish there was better technologies for just generic homes. For instance, like kids. We have technologies that protect these enterprises from a good portion of attacks. That same technology could be used in their home to control their iPad that you put your kids on that play Roblox or whatever that game's called, or this or that, where you could turn it off for a bit, or you could have like a, kind of security protocols or a profile in it so it locks it, and monitoring for your kids so that you know if they're, and today with AI, you can actually use it to figure out if there's someone over age talking to your child or certain terminologies. Some people may have a debate on privacy, but I'm like, I will protect my children at all costs underage over worrying about their privacy. You know what I mean? So like that's the reality. I think most parents feel the same way. And so I wish there was more technology in that direction. It's just not very usable, or it's not standardized, or it's expensive.
Now you use the two magic and yet scary letters, AI, because that's totally dominating the space in discussion now.
Yeah.
Just first of all, let's start with a nutshell description: threat or a friend?
Both. The beautiful thing about AI, and I think the thing that people don't really understand, is it is the first time in our history that we can speak any language we want, a human language, to a computer, and it will understand exactly what we want or need, and it will speak back to us in that language or in another language. What I mean by this is that, to write code to a computer requires a human to learn the code, do this and that, and then it goes and then it puts it in binary numbers and it crunches it, and then then it runs that, and that's a whole process, right? And then over the years we've gotten to like certain computer programming languages that are higher level, so it's easier to buy in, and anybody can do, like, there's a language called Python that you could start learning tomorrow, and in 3 months you'd be pretty proficient with it, because it's abstracted a lot of the complications away from old school computing, right? The memory and all the crazy stuff. But today you can literally, pretty much AI. Like I was talking to someone in Arabic using AI to do it instead of Google Translate. Translate's like a legacy translator. And my friend saw the message. He goes, "I can hear your voice in this. It's some pretty impressive Arabic." And the reason why is, let me break down what AI is about. AI is what's called a large language model. And what it has done is essentially we've trained it on all of our language, both in many different languages. So it's a math problem that statistically can figure out how to speak, essentially, and think that we do. And ironically, I found some of the services like ChatGPT to be even more mindful than we are, more thoughtful. I thought it was rather funny.
So basically, Lance, what's happening is it's your voice, the sound. It can mimic the sound of your voice in another language. Is that correct?
It can do that. So yes, it can. There are many pieces of AI, and let's talk about the things. There's the ChatGPT, which is you type or talk, like, and it turns it into text, and then it can pretty much that model is what's important. Is that breakthrough is that you can then train it on that algorithm can then also do vocals, it can do this, but it learns language and patterns of language. So it learns how to predict future human behavior, essentially. But it does it at faster speeds than we are. So if it's good or bad, it's both. For instance, I can use it to write ransomware, and I could also use it to defend against ransomware. So it is actually, it's almost like it's a double-edged sword, but it's moved us up just a notch. But it's now like the speed of the fight and the arms race, the back and forth, is going to just be faster.
So is it making humans redundant? Is your job going on the line as a result?
Absolutely not. It's actually making my job better. And I'll tell you why. I can code 50% faster because I'm not staring at Stack Overflow, which is a site for like finding a bug, or how do you do this, and it's like a Google for coders. I can literally, like, it's built into the side chat of my code, and I select a piece of code and I say fix this, and it literally just fixes it. I don't have to wrestle with creating anymore. And for the engineering artist that's very picky about that, maybe they'll fear it. But for someone like me who's a CEO that also happens to like to code and create things very quickly, it's magical. I've been able to create things so quickly and have ideas from idea to fruition about 50% faster. So it allows me to finally do the human work I need to do instead of being like, I gotta spend my days figuring this out.
On the issue of AI, I've been hearing stories more and more about people being scammed, where voices are copied. People, one person I know had, their daughter's voice mimic so well that that person just gave up money thinking their daughter had been in an accident. I mean, it's pretty horrible stuff, scamming an older person in this case. But it's even being used in a broader sense, because recently there was Joe Biden, a robocall going out with Joe Biden's voice created by AI, saying not to take a particular vote. So take me through that.
Yes. So what's scary is it's called AI voice cloning, right? Even Apple promotes it. You have the new M2s, and it'll let you train your voice, and you can type your speech, and it'll have your voice in it, and which is kind of scary. Yeah. So like, it also, some of these models only take 30 seconds of your voice and can work, right? Now, we've already heard of like where there's like a lot of phishing and attacks like this. This is common. So this is only going to open the door more for like scams. And there's also like Citibank scams, or like where it's like, hey, I need help, or send me money, and it only ups the trust, right? So how phishing and all of these scams work, it's all about like the higher you can develop misplaced trust, and the better confidence in that, the scammer wins, right? Now, I do want to counter with that there are tools out there that also can counter and detect AI. And I think that we're just, the problem is we're going to have to start getting those aligned into our phone lines and phone systems. The problem is, and we always battle with the privacy problem. Well, you're listening to my calls, things like that. So it'll have to be at the app side of it and figure this out. But the biggest challenge with AI cloning, and I'll give the audience some clues on to tell a little bit of the difference, is if you need to, one, just be a little bit more aware that this now exists. So when you're on a phone call with them, see if you can get their face, right? Hey, FaceTime, this and that. Now that we have video calls immediately, if you do have relatives, it would be good to have like a special code. When I was a kid, don't talk to strangers. I had a special code. It was pickle, right? So if a stranger was picking me up, but it was a friend of my parents, you know the code word. Right. So it'd be good to now, like, families have to think about this. Like if they're traveling abroad, you got to think about your security anyways. So, hey, if I'm stuck in that and I really do need money, that has happened. You got a code word, right? And you know that code word. So you want to use that. Secondly, there are inflections that it does not get very well. Under stress, it does not do the inflections that great. And so like try to realize that it, like the way it clones is that it like it looks for the medium tone of your voice. Right. I'm an expressive human being. When I type those things out, it doesn't have that expression. It just because it's trained on like just a standard set and probably a short amount of information, and then it can predict and create that same sound and what you would likely sound like.
By the way, I sounded Australian in one that a friend sent me.
Yeah. Oh, and also they're limited. Is that you have to have specific models for each accent. So there is still areas that the AI voice cloning, like you'd have to do American ones, training systems for American ones. I was trying to make my own Jarvis with the actual Tony Stark UK Jarvis voice. And I was they didn't have great UK model ones. And when I did it in an American one, it would just translate it in like an American accent from this. And I'm like, it's a challenge. So yeah.
Are you surprised, being in this business for so long and having seen so much from the inside, are you surprised with the pace of development?
Yes, I'm not gonna lie about that one. I'm surprised. I'm surprised and excited. I shouldn't be. I should be that security guy that's like, oh, there are more problems. But I'm also an innovator, right? And so I like that we get to these places of innovation. There are already flaws that I found with some of this AI stuff and security concerns outside even voice cloning that I'm looking at right now that I'll probably be writing about soon. But the AI one surprised me. That one came around like boom, but the minute it happened, I'm like, oh, this is a big disruption. This is huge, and I think people had to adjust for a second. But the minute, what I did last year when ChatGPT came out, I immediately jumped on that, wrote software and built it into my copy and paste, put out an open source project, and said, you can fear it. And I've learned something about. We go back to my hacker roots, right? The reason why I'm in computers is because I'm scared of what they could do if I didn't know enough about them. Right. So I don't, some people, I don't want to deal with devices and I'm afraid of computers and AI and blah, blah, blah. And so they don't, they go out in the forest and have a good life, right? Or I run towards that fear and figure out, and it's the same here as like AI, I'm like, ooh, exciting, but also scary. I'm going to really master and understand what we can do with AI. So when something does come up, I'm like, hey, we can also do this and this will help us. And then it's going to be interesting because we're going to have I feel like we're going to have an AI war, where it's like AI versus AI left and right. And it'll be doing our wars for us from a cyber problem. And it's going to be very interesting. It'll be in 20 years. But if we do get a cyber war, it won't be hackers at the keyboard anymore. There'll be just playbooks that are already set up, and then AI will adapt.
Is the whole Terminator scene a reality?
So the challenge with robots, I've been trying to make one. Okay, so I'll go with C-3PO first, and then we'll go over to Terminator.
So Star Wars first.
Well, the reason why is that, you know, AI today is more like a protocol droid, right? It understands multiple languages. It speaks, you know, binary evaporate. No, just kidding. But it essentially, it understands language. But right now it's single turn. I ask it a question, and then it answers back. What if I tried to talk to AI, I brought AI in a group of conversations? It would keep, every time someone spoke, it would try to answer something. Well, if you were a robot, that would be a problem. So what we need to master is how to teach, and it's doable, I think, but it's a little bit more work and it's probably still expensive. But essentially, now AI has to know when to think, right? Because the way the models work, and then when to actually produce stuff. So it has to look at a group and say, do I even need to respond to this, or do they have enough information, reasonability, like that it fits in? So the Terminators, the C-3POs, the robots, can't just be single turn. They have to be able to deal. The minute you throw a crowd of people trying to talk, it's going to interrupt everybody every second it gets noise. So you now have to like think about, the next step in AI is to think about how do you make it work with a group, right? Once you have that, robots are possible. I mean, like straight out like C-3POs are possible, right? And no, so then the other side of it is, you know, we've seen obviously there's wars between OpenAI and there's a company called Anthropic, which is the ex-OpenAI guys that left for ethical reasons because of copyright infringements. These are small things, but they're big things to a lot of things, such as artists. Artists like, hey, that was my image and that's my picture, and now you can just generate stuff, and that might put people out of a job, right? Because artists, there's a value in that artistry. That in that time, but now if you could just generate these amazing pictures, that could hurt them. What happens when it's music or this and that, right? Although they've tried that a few times and so far it hasn't picked up. Hopefully our humanity will kick in and will support the artist, you know. But essentially, as we hit in, you know, there's Anthropic, which is like, they're pretty impressive, but they call themselves a constitutional AI. It's an ethics. It's like tries to be as trustworthy, little hallucinations, the idea of it making up information. And then you have ChatGPT, and again, these are just wars. I'm going with hypotheticals of just what's out there. This doesn't mean I agree with any of the sides or can confirm any of this information. But over time, they try to build in moderation, you know, at the top. Like, hey, I'm not allowed to do that. But security people already have figured out how to kind of like, you know, hijack that and make it do stuff. We made a evil chatbot on purpose based on like some of our criminal underground data, and I was able to bypass the moderations and make it pretty much be one of the most racist evil chatbots, because this is what these kids are like online, and it did it, and it just used the model and then the vector database, and it would mimic its style, right? So yes, you could use it for evil. I don't know if we're like gonna have Terminators until we get like, obviously, like, you know, but I can see that yes, you can make an evil robot and you can make a good one once we get that group thing figured out. So
Lance, I know with the way technology is going, this is definitely not our last conversation, so I look forward to more.
Oh, I do too. Thank you so much.
Okay. Last month, the US Department of Justice announced it had worked with international allies to shut down a Russian bot farm which was using AI to spread propaganda and disinformation. The DOJ said the operation had created 1,000 fake social media accounts posing as American citizens, expressing support for Russia's invasion of Ukraine and seeking to influence the US presidential election. My next guest was a senior US intelligence officer specializing in counterterrorism and code breaking. Malcolm Nance has studied and written about the goals of Vladimir Putin and the Russian intelligence network's effort to sow disinformation. And he recently served with the Ukrainian Foreign Legion, a group of international fighters supporting Ukrainian resistance to the Russian invasion. Malcolm Nance, thank you very much for your time. I want to start by asking you, what has the US Department of Justice said about this particular operation with the Russian bot farm?
Well, for the most part, this is one of many different types of influence operations that have been carried out for over the last 8 years. It's just that now we've been able to determine and identify one specific one that was done with the assistance of law enforcement, and now that the Department of Justice can actually take action against. 99% of the time, we never find these farms. They work through a lot of cutouts. They work through a series of servers and the dark web. It's very unique that we, in fact, got to the point where you could actually make an indictment and come out against the people who could be identified enough to shut them down.
That's interesting you say that, because there are obviously reports and a certain degree of speculation too, but who, in your opinion, would be involved in setting up such a plan, and who would sign off on it? Would President Putin be aware for sure?
Well, you know, I've been tracking this for over 9 years now. Russia's influence operations started back in the early 2000s with a document called the Gerasimov Doctrine, who was the commander of the Russian armed forces. And the Gerasimov Doctrine was to create an influence operation on such a massive scale that they could actually tilt the opinions of foreign populations. Vladimir Putin, ex-KGB officer, intelligence officer, signed off on this long ago. And what we called very early on the first web war, when Russia started carrying out operations against the nation state of Georgia, Estonia, Latvia, moved on to influencing elections in Ukraine and other places through these bot farms, really took off in 2015 with the attack on, the hacking of the Democratic National Committee headquarters in the United States, and then militarizing it by giving most of their operations to the Russian military intelligence, the GRU, and their special activities units, and then allowing Yevgeny Prigozhin to carry out a civilian activity known as the Internet Research Agency. This is an integral part of Russia's soft power now, and it appears to be successful in many places.
I was going to say, apart from what is considered state-sponsored interference, how likely is it that individuals could act independently of any Russian government involvement? How often is that an issue? Is it something that would even be encouraged, perhaps, by the government?
Well, it's always encouraged by them. In fact, the first web war, as we called it, started out with a situation that occurred in Estonia, where they removed a Russian military statue. As you know, that was a former occupied state from the Soviet Union, which had many Soviet statues there. When they removed that statue, individual actors in the Russian, cyber world started attacking Estonia. And this is where the Russian intelligence and diplomatic apparatus saw that they could harness the power of individuals, organize it, and turn it into a dagger, or more importantly, a tool to hack the mindset of a foreign population. So this has been going on for some time. Interestingly, it hasn't been as successful for Ukraine as it's been for the United States government, or when they tried to influence Brexit, the Scottish referendum, the referendum on Catalonia in Spain.
Now, of course, there is the application within Russia itself, where people can be given some degree of confidence in their leader because of the information that's out there. It's used to kind of shape society. But I wonder, what would Russia at a government level hope to achieve by interfering with US elections?
Well, they've already done it. And this is a component of the Gerasimov Doctrine. And if your watchers want to learn more about it, there's a document on the internet called the NATO Handbook on Russian influence operations. It's essentially how Russia attacks nations, changes the media environment, changes the information globosphere, so to speak, where you get information, then seeds it with disinformation, misinformation, lies, and allows individual players within those societies to pick up their disinformation, run with it, and then influence it. When Russia hacked the Democratic National Committee in 2015 and 2016, they did exactly what happened to what Richard Nixon ordered with Watergate. They got dirt, they got information, and even if the information was benign, by stealing it, they could seed it with whatever they wanted. And they seeded the information spear, so to speak, with the false accusation that they had 30,000 of Hillary Clinton's private internal emails. They didn't. But the conspiratorial information space believed it, and believed it right to the point that it came out of Donald Trump's mouth. Russia assisted the Trump campaign, directly and indirectly and through information operations to make this conspiratorial tone against Hillary Clinton and got him elected. And that's what they really want, power and influence by corrupting our elections.
Now, of course, social media has really had a big impact on how the information can be spread. How easily do you think people in the USA would be influenced by disinformation created in Russian bot farms?
9 years ago, I would have said it was very difficult, we're thoughtful, but now the information space has changed dramatically. And, I hesitate to use the word information space. It is actually a domain of information battlesphere, right? This is where there literally is a fight. We're using information to technically hack the mindset or the beliefs of your society. Look, the United States is very vulnerable. We have already seen with the rise of the MAGA sphere, right, the Make America Great campaign by Donald Trump. They believe any conspiracy that's put out there, so long as it comes out of the mouth of Donald Trump. It is then captured and magnified by the Russian disinformation machine. Now we see China has been playing this game as well. Not to mention their own people will disseminate anything. And this creates a giant avalanche of false information that no individual can check. And even if you try to use a governmental organization like, the National Critical Infrastructure, the National Cyber Infrastructure Agency, you can't. Laws allow freedom of speech. So speech has been weaponized and lies themselves can become, on the ground facts. They're Googleable. So this is the danger because fundamental documents like the Constitution of the United States or the Bill of Rights, if you get enough lies out there giving a false interpretation, you can change the mindset of, let's count by now, 74 million people that believe that the 2020 election was stolen. That's just a lie, but they believe it.
Your experience, when it comes back to these bot farms and the disinformation that is really being pumped out there, how successful is the US in defending against such attacks?
Yeah, we're very poor. Let's just be frank. The very vehicles that make America the country that it is, right? This bastion of freedom of speech, freedom of association, freedom of sharing of information, freedom of religion. All of these are fundamental building blocks that our adversaries have seen could be weaponized against us. And that's why you have Russia jumping in on freedom of speech through these bot farms. Same with China. And if you've never seen a bot farm, just Google the phrase bot farm. And what you'll see banks and banks and banks of hundreds of telephones that have all been connected together to one central keyboard or one central telephone, and they're all fake profiles, thousands upon thousands of fake profiles, and they will put out the exact same words, or an AI will put out a variation of those words, right. And then it will look like some individual, and that you're being influenced by individual people who are all of a like mind, when in fact you are being influenced by a foreign intelligence agency, or you're being influenced by a foreign disinformation operation in order to hack your mindset and tell you what you think the crowd is doing and hope that you go along with it.
The
United States is not very good at that because our very laws protect those speeches, even if they're from a Chinese bot farm.
Let's tap into what you've just said about AI, because that can vary the message. In the old days, of course, it was far more obvious. It was all coming, the same kind of message was going out. So from what you've experienced over these years, AI has become a much bigger player. How has AI changed the game for those wanting to cause chaos or influence opinion among the American electorate?
Good, excellent question. It's dramatically changed the game. You have to understand that AI fundamentally, AI is just an automated process to make things that we do routinely go faster. So like when you make that phone call and you want to pay a bill and it's asking you a series of obviously stated questions. It's just now in text, it's so good, you can virtually not tell it apart from another person unless you see the idiosyncrasies of speech or see some of the characteristics that show that you're speaking to AI. Many circumstances, you may think you're talking to an actual human or receiving a message from a human. but it is as fast as a billionth of a second. That's how fast it can send a message. So if you want to send out 1 billion phone messages, if you have access to the telephones, you have access to the ability to make that kind of communication, you can influence multiple systems in less than enough time that it takes to write your message and stroke a keyboard. That has far greater depth than news media, far greater depth than Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. A really quick example of it. TikTok put out a video, allowed a series of videos for a few days last year in the October 7th era, where American citizens claimed that they were influenced by Osama bin Laden's letter to America and justifying the mass murder of 3,000 people. It influenced tens of thousands before it was shut down, but it was based on a terrorist letter committing mass murder, but had managed to convince people that it was justified.
Right.
You could do that for anything. You could justify the mass murder of Uyghurs in China who are Muslims. You could justify the mass murder of anybody if you own the distribution system of information. And again, hack the mindset of your victim population.
Just a final thought. As someone with extensive military experience, I want to put this to you. As we've seen, a 20-year-old man with a rifle in Pennsylvania was just millimeters away from overturning the political landscape in America, and it led to immediate accusations between the parties about the use of incendiary language and threats of political violence. So how much does that play into the hands of those who wish to sow chaos in the country? And I wondered, to what degree is the US facing a particularly vulnerable moment in that respect?
Well, this particular incident, I believe, will eventually show that the young man was radicalized in the exact same way that we used to complain about, young boys and girls being radicalized by the Islamic State's ideology. They see something on the internet, it inspires them, it makes them want to do something and become part of a structure. The Islamic State, on the other hand, would ask you to join the jihad by bringing you physically from where you are to another country and becoming part of that network. This is how can I put it? This is sort of like a virtual world where you don't have to leave your house. You just acquire the negative ideologies, right? Like this young man, we don't know precisely what set him off. Right. He was very conservative. He was a registered Republican. He was a loner on issues that were socially conservative in his classroom. But at the same time, we don't know whether he wanted to be like John Hinckley, the man who shot Ronald Reagan twice, shot his Secret Service officer twice, and his press secretary once, because he wanted to impress the actress Jodie Foster.
Right.
So I don't know if this young man wanted to impress Taylor Swift by killing Donald Trump, was suffering clearly a mental health breakdown. But on the other hand, 5 months ago, Alex Jones, along with a former Special Forces colonel, came out there and were discussing in this very conservative, very well-followed conspiracy theory website video, saying the best thing that could happen to the Republicans is assassinating Donald Trump, because that would mobilize the conservatives to wipe liberal America off the face of the map, which is insane, right? But this kid may have watched that and taken it to heart. We just don't know yet.
Malcolm Nance, there's always so much to talk about. Hope we get a chance to talk some more. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Battling the bots has focused the minds of those organizing the Paris Olympics. The French Prime Minister, Gabriel Attal, said cyber attacks on the Games were inevitable and that the key thing was to limit their impact. The French authorities assembled a dream team of government and private cybersecurity experts to counter the threat of up to 4 billion cybersecurity attacks. Israel accused Iran of organizing an AI attack against its athletes in Paris, using bots to spread disinformation and threats on social media. And a fake video purporting to show a Hamas fighter vowing bloody carnage on the streets of Paris was viewed millions of times before security experts concluded it was actually the work of a Russian disinformation group. Well, all of which is a long jump from the Olympic spirit that embodies the principles of excellence, respect, and friendship. It seems that overcoming the challenge of cybersecurity remains a marathon rather than a sprint. I'm Riz Khan from me and the team. Thanks for watching, and see you soon.